please try to remain quiet as possible because we need to respect the active speaker speaking. And then when the speaker is still speaking in between during their speech, do not move around and go out and in. Only move out when you want to go to the toilet in between speeches. Yeah, everyone understood?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Right. You can continue.
Am I audible at this volume?
Yeah.
Okay. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, opposition throws children into the flames of peer pressure, exploitation, and abuse that leave ordinary parents to fend for their kids. Government is simple. We use policy to disincentivize and regulate. We stop the flame at its base before it spreads and before it meets firefighters who are regular people. So proud to propose. Now my speech today, first we're going over 6 layers of setup, and after that one argument on how there is better regulation and child safety on our side. Firstly, what is the cause of depression and suicide in status quo? We tell you it stems from cyberbullying through social media platforms like Instagram, like Facebook. It also comes from these teens being groomed by people, them being set up by people, because these are inherently easy targets for these people. Now, why are social media platforms responsible here? Because we tell you, number one, social media could actually impose better regulations if they wanted to. But the reason why they don't do it is because they know kids are a huge audience, and when they put things like IC verification for age, many people are cut out from their audience base. This is why they will not do it. Now, number two, we tell you that it is the platform where it happens. A simple analogy here. If parents allow you to go to school, if you get injured or die, it's still the school's responsibility because that is the platform, that is the catalyst for where it happens. Now, next part, who is actually holding them accountable? I tell you it's in the two forms. Number one, parents, and number two, the government. Because there is an obligation from the government to protect the people, number one, and you simply cannot push this obligation aside to the parents like what side opposition will do in today's debate. Next, what does holding them accountable actually look like in this debate? It's like suing them, it's like financial penalties, it's like imposing stricter regulations like policies. We tell you how this will work in our case today, and we tell you how it directly goes against the incentives of these companies, which will force them to change. Because if they are not profiting, if they are forced to pay huge amounts, they will not continue to violate these policies. Next, what is the problem with social media in status quo we are trying to fix? It's very simple, weak regulation. Because social media companies have an incentive to allow controversy. Because controversy drives more users towards them. When there's controversy, people use these platforms more. This is why they will not regulate. This is why they want to perpetuate controversy in their platforms. Next, how does it become social media's fault, not the parents? We tell you that parents can't monitor you for the whole day. It's a simple analogy again. You go to school, your parents can't watch over you the whole day. This is why it's the school's fault if you were harmed in the process. The school needs to protect you if it's the platform for this bullying and it's the for exploitation. So, because parents can't monitor you the whole day, because you are somewhere else, that the other party is forced to protect the kids because that is the platform. The only comparative here is to ban the kids, which is absolutely unrealistic because we tell you social media is a core of controversy, is a core of society. Even if you ban these kids, there is peer pressure. When all their friends on social media, they want to be on social media too. Children will find loopholes to get into social media. They will never be able to be totally banned from social media, which I tell you the comparative will totally fail here. Now, what does mechanization look like on our side? We tell you that for each case that is directly linked to social media, the government will sue them, the government will impose huge financial penalties. We tell you it's very likely to work because social media platforms are power-hungry and profit-hungry corporations. It's also likely to work because these cases are directly linked. The government has the ways of ensuring that it's linked through chat history, through browsing history, and we tell you that it will work. Now, one note here. Side government does not oppose social media as a whole. We oppose the hugely unregulated version of social media prevalent on side opposition. We do not oppose things like YouTube Kids, which are highly regulated and protect the kids. Our burden of proof here is extremely simple. From side government, we will prove how better regulation is likely to happen exclusively on our side, and we prove how it leads to safer practices, which inherently benefits the kids because they are in a safer platform, because they are not exposed to all the harms that exist in status quo on side opposition. I tell you, for opposition to win this debate, it's a very simple burden which they will not be able to prove. They need to prove how the protection of kids happens without regulations on their side. Because insofar as there are no regulations, I do not see another way where they are able to regulate these platforms, where they are able to eradicate the bad actors from social media. Now, Before I move on to my point, any POIs? Yes.
Who exactly are you suing and finding?
We are suing these social media companies, these huge conglomerates like Facebook. You sue them because they have the financial incentives to profit. When they no longer profit as much because of the financial penalties, they are unlikely to unlikely to oppose these regulations because they want the profit to the maximum level. So when they realize, right, that you still can have the audience base of the kids, the only thing you need to do is regulate. They will continue to pay you. They are fine. They will regulate. Now, one argument on how it leads to better regulation on our side. I think it's very simple. But firstly, what is the reason that regulation is extremely weak in status quo? We tell you it's for the simple reason of there being zero incentives for social media to regulate these platforms. Because their only incentive is for profit, and kids are a huge user base. When controversy happens in these social media platforms, it attracts people to these platforms because people like drama. When there is controversy surrounding these platforms, when there is controversial news being perpetuated by these platforms, people flock the platforms, people use the platforms more, people pay more for the platforms. That is the sole incentive of these companies in status quo. It's so simple. How exactly do we solve it here? On two levels. Number one, on how we show that the company that the government actually cares, because they will be hugely penalized if they were to continue these practices, if kids were harmed on a daily basis because of what is inherently perpetuated by social media. People being abused, people being exploited, people being forced to adhere to extremely high standards. It totally goes against their profit incentives when they are unable to earn as much anymore. It means that they will change and they are forced to change because of the goal of profit. Number two, how we will impose extremely concrete laws and extremely strict laws on how we will have better age verification, and number two, how better filtering. We tell you, right, that when these social media companies don't adhere, we are likely to increase the regulations higher and higher and higher. So they know if they do not take a stance now, if they do not stop it now, we will take a stance and the government will stop it at that point. Example is very simple. Of Twitter, how they allow freedom to happen, right? So that people have rights of expression and they are able to profit from the controversy, which is actually what's happening in status quo. Where we draw the line is not where companies make money from controversy. We have zero problem. But where we draw the line is actually where children are the ones put at risk, because we tell you that children are the people put at risk in this debate and it cannot be sacrificed. One note here, you need to know that adults can consent. Children are under the age of consent. There is no world where the eradication of children's safety is justified. There is nothing the opposition can prove in this debate. So proud to propose.
Right, thank you, Prime Minister. Leader of Opposition, whenever you're ready.
I'll be beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the moment government fails to tell you why holding social media liable is going to make mental health issues so much better is the point where they lose the debate. Okay, let's talk about your points. You say that the main causes of depression and suicide on SOCMED are cyberbullying and grooming, but you fail to solve other issues that lead to depression and suicide, such as bullying in real life, that still happens, sexual assault that happens in real life that cannot happen in SOCMED, and abuse from parents that happen also in real life from SOCMED. Furthermore, you are basically your policy is to fine the government if depression cases happen on your side. Oh no, fine the social media if government fine social media if depression cases or suicide cases happen on your side. How are you supposed to identify what cases to fine? Who are the people actually going to be affected by this when you sue the social media? Who are you suing? The top of the chain? That's not going to affect anything. They're just going to cut their profit margins a little, I guess. Now, can only prove to you in this speech that holding social media liable and accountable and imposing all these strict fines is only going to exacerbate the root cause of the problem, and Gov is not dealing with the root cause of the problem. Because when you push all the blame onto social media, like Inga, they say that social media is a root contributor. You are going to be confusing the symptoms, the contributors and the root cause. Okay, I'll characterize this more and I'll set this up more, and this will lead into my sentence. Okay, you say that once social media is going to be fine and whatever to stop these cases from happening, you provide the incentive for social media companies to stop doing this later. And then but we tell you that this is likely to prevent, we tell you that social media companies, in this case, are likely to use censorship to disincentivize or like lower these depression and suicide rates. And we tell you that this is going to only exacerbate the issue. We say that when social media is held responsible, then you are pushing all your problems and all your burdens onto social media, and you are not addressing the root cause of the problem, which may stem from issues outside social media. You are going to say that yes, what?
If I gave you a gun and you used it to kill someone, yes, you are to blame for killing the person, but aren't I to blame for giving you the gun?
Why would you give me a gun in the first place? This is not. I'll further explain this I'll further address this in the argument. When you are in a room with influenza and there's an AC that spreads the influenza disease, you are not going to blame the AC as, oh, that AC will cause my influenza. In your gun example, why would I want to kill the person in the first place? I'm not going to suddenly want to kill a person just because you gave me a gun, correct? This is the narrative they push on you. That social media, since it's a tool used for a tool that aids in the suicide and depression rates, it is going to be the root cause. And people are going to likely take this because people want to believe in a narrative, right? They want the narrative that exists in their head to be true. And since social media, and so now you have parents believing that, oh, my kid has depression because of social media, because they realize they read a post on social media about depression and they realize they are depressed. Since social media is the trigger for this depression, I should blame social media for this problem without actually addressing what caused me to have depression in the first place. Yes?
Sure, we bite the bullet that bullying may happen in real life, but we tell you what government do is take away one avenue of bullying. You cannot prove the benefit on your side.
How are you gonna exactly regulate? Okay, you say you impose fines on the people who own the social media company. How is that going to stop people from bullying on the internet? The people who run the company and the people who bully on the internet are different. So because we argue that social media is simply a tool. The tool, because body image issues, abuse, sexual assault, all these have always existed and will continue to exist even in your side, even in our side. We argue that social media creates awareness about these issues because now more people are reading about depression on social media. They realize they have depression, and now if they realize they have depression, in the case that it will be harmful to blame social media because suddenly, once you read these posts about depression on the internet, you have depression and it's social media's fault. We tell you that in our case, at least getting them to recognize that they have depression will help address the root causes. Because if we're not blaming social media, then we have to blame other contributors, such as the sexual assault abuse that's perpetrated by parents, by other people in real life. Then we get the world to see and address these root causes of the problem. And we defend status quo because by allowing your fines and censorship, the fines are likely to lead to censorship, we are not exacerbating the problem of the lack of awareness. We are not creating the narrative that, oh, since social media since my kid has gotten rid of social media, now they will be fine. They will be completely fine. They will no longer have depression. The depression will magically disappear once social media is regulated. So with that, I would like to continue on to basically, I would like to address some of the other things. So we agree that, in this debate, we have proven to you that we want to protect kids on both sides. However, in your case, the root cause of the kids having depression is not addressed, it's not going to be addressed further because of this censorship, because of this restriction. And in our case, at least we have the more awareness, more spread of social media, of depression and all its causes and issues that allow people to not only take away all those root causes of the problem, to help solve those root causes of the problem, but we also allow access to the good things about social media, such as the manuals and help channels that exist on social media to help combat depression in the first place. And with that, I hand the floor to
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Deputy Prime Minister, whenever you're ready.
Starting my speech, and 3, 2, and 1. It is painfully obvious that the debate is already over from the first exchange, because they have posited to you that they never fundamentally understood why people are held accountable, or why certain things lead to certain outcomes. They tell you that just because you sue companies, nothing will happen. They fail to understand that suing companies reduces the profit of those companies, and that is something that I'm going to be explaining later. Before I move on to one argument on government obligation, there's a few responses that I have to make before one major clarification on the yardstick of moral responsibility. Firstly, on the narrative, because they said that when you hold social media platforms liable, the narrative will then shift, so parents are able to take their reins free. This is incredibly ridiculous, because just because social media platforms are held accountable, it does not suddenly wipe away the narrative that parents are not responsible as well. Because parents, I think, is numerously considered that parents are also arbitrators of their child's life. They are, as we are saying, also responsible. But the problem is more than one person or more than one entity can be responsible for a child's life. It does not just have to be one person, and they have to prove why it is specifically just the parents in their debate. But on to my second response then. They said that abuse happens in real life as well. It's an easy response to take down because we win on scale. Just because abuse happens in real life as well does not mean we should, okay, let's not involve ourselves any further and let abuse and exploitation happen on social media platforms. I don't understand the point of that rebuttal. But thirdly, they say that we can get them to recognize that they have depression and we can attack the root cause of the problem. I'm sorry, but exposing your child to people who are going to exploit them, to groomers, to gore, to every single unregulated thing that is on Twitter or Instagram is not going to help them realize that they have depression. But even if so, we're going to be willing to take the trade-off because social media not only helps you realize you have depression but also exacerbates it. When you're in echo chamber and everyone is talking about how life sucks, there is no awareness. You're just enabling each other's painful behaviors. When you go online and you see someone post their cuts on their arm because they self-harm and there was no regulation that was imposed, that enables your depression and that takes down the impact entirely. On to one major clarification then. What is the yardstick of moral responsibility? Note that this is independent of outcome. Regardless of whether we have better outcomes, if we manage to prove that the government is fully morally liable of this responsibility and social media is also liable of this, then they have to prove the principal outcome as well. Simple intuition part. If you see a drowning man and you do nothing, you are also morally culpable for not saving the drowning man. If you have the ability and the knowledge to stop something from happening, and that is where I take down their air conditioner example. Because the air conditioner could never do anything. It is an object. The difference between an air conditioner and the person giving you the gun is the person could just just chosen not to give you the gun. The aircon was switched on by someone else. This example is irrelevant. You have the ability and you have the knowledge. Social media platforms know that people are being abused, that children underage are roaming free on their platforms, and they choose to do nothing about it because of their mechanism of profit incentive, and that is why they are specifically morally culpable. Before I move on to my arguments, any POIs? 3, 2, 1. I'll take one later if there's any. Firstly, on the principal obligation of the government. Before I start, this is independent of outcome. So no matter what outcome they try to prove, if they don't take down this principle, it still stands. Firstly, why does this obligation exist? Because being on social media directly perpetuates the suicides and the depression that we're talking about. We're talking about things like cyberbullying. We're talking about things like grooming. We're talking about things like child exploitation. It's a cesspool of racism and personal attacks. And social media platforms, no matter how much regulation they can do, will never be able to regulate all of it. And that is why specifically we do not let children opt into something that can never be fully controlled. You do not let someone walk into hell if you know that there is a chance that there would be fire. Social media platforms deserve retribution when they are the direct enabler of the harm. They deserve to be blamed for horrible regulations that are malevolent. It is a state failure that could not protect citizens. They might say, but why is it the government's problem? Well, it is the government's problem in the same way the state does not control natural disasters, but are blamed with the way they respond to it. Just because there is a problem that you didn't directly cause does not mean that you as the government is not liable for that problem. So why are parents not fully liable then? Firstly, they cannot control what their children do 90% of the time. But secondly, and more importantly, they often do not know what their children are doing on social media, who they are interacting with, what platforms they are using, simply because most children our age have phones. I had Twitter at the age of 9, and I'm sure most of you had too. The point in which regulations are unregulated, and the only thing stopping you is your mom saying, please don't go on Twitter. The point in which you think, my mom is uncool, I'm going to go on Twitter. That is the point in which education does not work. So why is our side better then? Because social media platforms, parents cannot be blamed over an actor that directly caused the harm. Because the inverse of this is social media platforms do know they are in charge of moderating their own platforms. And if they don't know, let's say that they are going to say that how are social media platforms supposed to know that people are grooming their children? It is specifically because you didn't know that someone could post gore, that you didn't know that someone could groom a child. That's exactly why you should not let children be exposed to that kind of behavior. So if they say, but social media platforms cannot control anything, that's specifically why you should not let children be on that platform at all. Yes?
How would these regulations even look like under your side?
Okay, so firstly, we're going to impose stricter regulations, as Keegan said, on age restrictions. This means that just instead of declaring, I am 13 at the age of 8, you then have to provide things like your IC, like your birth certificate, things that certify that you are over the age of 13. But secondly, we're also going to sue companies that do not follow these procedures, and this goes against the profit incentive that Keegan explained earlier. So, on to impact that. Social media platforms are the direct cause and therefore should be held accountable irrespective of outcome. Right. Firstly, on our side, children aren't exposed to all of these influences, and that is something that we have worked so hard to protect. We are the only side that actually tells you that the people who are directly responsible, direct enablers, direct causes of this harm are the ones that should be held responsible. Parents should not be held responsible for something they cannot control. But I hear them say, but if parents really want to do all this, why didn't they just stop their children from going on social media? Firstly, they don't know. But secondly, we tell you that children are also victims of peer pressure. If you are thinking that, there's a chance that my child will be exploited, but your child is looking at you with puppy eyes saying, but all my friends have Instagram, then there is in that case, it is extremely hard for parents to make the decision because it's also an emotional attachment to that child that they have to fulfill. We then say the only thing that stops it is a wall that stops children from going into these platforms. The only thing that stops it is regulation from these social media companies. Otherwise, all you're doing is putting a blanket over the solution and not actually stopping people from going over that wall. So proud to propose.
Right. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of Opposition, whenever you're ready.
So, wait, we can, or do you prefer to use this one? You can see from here.
Can also. That's okay. I think you. Yeah.
Then I do it.
Hello, as long as we can prove to you that holding these social media platforms liable isn't actually going to do anything, but instead makes the problem worse, and I think makes mental health issues for youth a lot worse. I think we can take down Proposition's case. Few things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to go through 3 main responses, and I'm going to be going through 2 new substances coming from opposition debate, in which I'll point out 3 flips that I would like to make from their argument today. The first response I want to give is in response to their first speaker, when the entire argument is about them having better security and better regulation. I think firstly, this argument is contingent on social media being the only factor to depression. When they tell us like, oh, when you see gone, you see self-harm and all that, that's what causes depression. But do you know there's no reason to believe that is the only link between like having depression, like being on social media and having depression? Where's the link between this? And there's no reason why we need to hold social media like platforms liable simply because there is no proof of that link being there. But the second thing I want to point out is how their side never actually tackled the root of the problem. Because if evil people, i.e. like cyber bullies, exist like on both sides, like if they exist online, they will exist either way. And like the problems are still not going to be addressed under their side of the house. Will prove why when you shift the burden of mental health problems being onto when you shift the burden onto social media platforms being the direct root cause of the problem, that is the tipping point in which you make mental health problems a lot worse. I think secondly then, we can concede that perhaps cyberbullying rates will go down. But they tell you the only way you can do this is if you have super duper strict regulations, right? Fine, we can concede to that, but then we'll flip that later on to tell you why that is not necessarily a good thing. The third thing I want to point out is there a strange mechanism on like the restrictions. From both first and second, we hear about the idea of age restriction, which I think is extremely funny considering the second speaker told us that when you see gone, when you see people self-harming online, that is what causes your depression. So regardless of whether or not, like it's not on the content regulation, right? You like panel realize that point only matters if you have actual regulation on your content. But either way, it is just a difference on who actually sees the material online, right? It doesn't matter because their content was never regulated in the first place. This harm still exists under their side of the house. Done with responses. I'm going to go on to the first argument in which you actually take away mental health awareness. And this is where we flip their argument on regulation and we tell you why super strict regulations are actually result in far worse outcome than they would like you to believe. We tell you with super strict regulation, it's going to look like certain things being censorship the moment you see any caption, you see any like sign of there being like a self-harm or depression or any anxiety, in regards to any sort of mental health issue. Because social media platforms being held liable obviously do not want to get sued again, like what Proposition is proposing to you, right? They don't want any of this content be going around on their platform. When you stop talking about it online, you take away one of the main ways in which people actually learn about mental health in the first place. You also take away an escape for multiple people struggling with mental health. Use social media as an escape and where they use social media to find other support groups and find other people who are struggling with this. I want to then talk about the idea of parents under our side of the house. I think the moment in which you shift the burden onto social media, that is when parents will weaponize that. For like a few pieces of framing under this. I think firstly, parents don't necessarily have the education and know about mental health issues because they were never taught it as a kid. Number two, there is a stigma that exists within the older generation about mental health in the first place, where they believe that mental health is almost just take Panadol and walk it off, right? That is the kind of mentality that we have to deal with. But number three, when you shift the burden onto social media, they weaponize that kind of burden and avoid the accountability that comes from the result in like their kids having depression in the first place. What do we mean by this? When you blame another party, that means you don't actually have any reflection on the underlying issues that your kids are facing. Because it is so much easier for parents to say, it's that dang phone that causes your depression, rather than actually taking into account perhaps there is some reasoning behind why they feel this way in the first place. I think what's the comparative on the our side of the house? We tell you, fine, parents aren't necessarily going to change their mentality. We can't prove that parents will change the way they feel, but we can prove that the burden pushed onto like social media platforms
being like the big contributing factor and holding them liable for contributing to these things, it's just another avenue for them to weaponize it and to use against their kids instead of taking accountability, because it's so much easier to push the blame onto someone else. I think secondly, under our comparative, you are able to give that avenue to people who are who have mental health problems to find certain support groups online, because the moment you restrict this and you have really strict, you impose super strict regulations onto them, you limit this avenue that a lot of mentally ill people use to actually not be isolated and to actually talk to other people and actually share about these problems that they are often stigmatized in real life. Down with that argument, let's go on to these okay, that's where we flip the argument of parents onto their side. But then second argument, then why is it better we shift the burden onto proper awareness and how we actually able to achieve that under our side of the house? And this is where we flip the third flip on where we the idea of it being social media's fault. I will tell you why exactly that is a terrible thing. They want to push to you that it being social media's fault is a good thing, but here's what we tell you why it's not. Firstly, that is when you undermine the importance of dealing with this issue. Secondly, that is when people do not want to deal with the issue because it is deemed not as unimportant or not not that important, right? But then thirdly, I think that is also unfair to push the blame onto social media when there are a bunch of other contributing factors that can contribute to depression, can contribute to suicide. I think it's unfair if you want to push that link between social media and suicides alone and hold these platforms liable in the first place. I think then I just want to point out that most people do know that social media is a contributing factor. We concede that, we don't deny that social media may play a role in that. The difference is then how people view these view mental health after this. Because the problem that exists in their side of the house is when people do not want accountability, do not want to take accountability for the real actions and the real underlying issues that they face. That is when they need to the easiest option, which is to blame another party. Specifically to blame social media because, oh, I saw these things on social media and now I'm depressed, right? There is a comparative that's on the our side. It's how now you have the existing burden and the higher likelihood in which you will deal with the issues at hand. But secondly, we also tell you that people are more likely to stop overlooking it and deal with it seriously because at the end of the day, perhaps it is not just that damn phone that caused your depression. So proud to oppose.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Now I'd like to invite the government whip to deliver their speech here.
Saya go toilet.
You want to go toilet?
It's fine, okay, we talk. Can you tell me more speeches? Just wait before replying.
Panel, I'm at a loss on how side opposition actually solves the problem on so many kids facing bullying, exploitation, and bullying on the daily. Realize how the only thing opposition says to solve this is, oh, we will solve the root by making sure that people just don't have the nature to post such terrible things. I have no idea how opposition could somehow change the minds of everyone and eradicate all bad actors. This counterfactual simply does not fly. This house would motion, and you need a successful counter model. My speech today will consist of 3 parts. Firstly, my responses, secondly, my questions, and lastly, my word comparison. So first on my responses. Firstly, they say that there are other factors that actually cause depression. The difference here is simple. Opposition allows 2 avenues for this to happen. Government lowers the avenue to only one where we can actually regulate. Secondly, everyone can see violent things on social media. Adults have the cognitive ability to filter through this content. Adults have the opt-in factor and the ability to consent. Government tells you that children can't consent and how they are susceptible to peer pressure, which means from the start they never had a choice. Rejected. Moving on to my third response. They talk about how mental health and awareness likes to be influenced by them. So therefore, we trade this off because influence is dangerous. And now moving on to my clash. What this debate really comes down to today is which side better protects the youth. Social media is a cesspool. They know that their main audience is children and youth, and although they restrict it's children and youth, although they already restrict them, it's not effective, and this is a fact. The age restriction thing is useless because people just lie. The terms and conditions, people just don't read them, and the restricted posts, we all watch them anyways. So we tell you that the measures in place in status quo is not enough. It is not enough to prevent things like cyberbullying, pedophilia, and grooming. Insofar as opposition cannot prove that the measures present in status quo are actually effective, they cannot win this case. Sure, rejected. They want to push it onto the parents. In this debate, we tell you that the liability can be pushed onto three stakeholders. Firstly, the youth themselves. This one is simple. You cannot blame the youth for what they do on social media because they are youth. They are immature, they are inexperienced, and we cannot expect them to act like rational adults. Children cannot consent to what they don't know. And now moving on. Secondly, the second stakeholder are parents. Opposition can talk all they want about how parents should be responsible to monitor their children. Okay, we can concede to this, but only to a certain extent, because parents can only monitor their children to a certain extent. Parents can only know so much about what's going on in their children's life. It's nearly impossible for you to expect a parent to helicopter around their child, waiting for something bad to happen. Even if parents restrict their children's social media usage, we all know how this goes, because if your parents tell you not to use social media, you all use it anyways. So parents cannot consent if they don't know what's happening. And so now bringing this back to social media. We believe that social media deserves retribution, because just like what DPM said, a state isn't the one that controls if the natural disaster happens, but they are to blame for how they deal with it and for how they deal with the effects of the natural disaster. Social media should be held liable because they do know what's happening. Even if opposition tries to say that the platform doesn't know what's happening, that's an even bigger issue. There's an even bigger issue and an even bigger incentive for them to be liable, so stricter regulations can be imposed. We already tell you that the regulations in opposition side that exist in status quo are simply not effective, which is why on our side we hold social media platforms liable, and they will finally open their eyes and impose stricter regulations, so they won't end up getting sued, and they have the incentive here. With these regulations, the youth on our side are better protected. On the contrast, on opposition side, we tell you that in status quo, the companies have no incentive to protect the youth, because in fact they benefit from exposing the youth, from exploiting their emotions, because more likes and more clicks equals more profit. And now moving on to my work comparison, proving you how even our worst case scenario will defeat their best case scenario. In their best case scenario, in their idealistic world, somehow they fix the root cause and make everyone a good person, the model citizen. So why is this? So two reasons of why this is not possible. There's no analysis on how they're going to do this. And secondly, we tell you that a small minority of bad people will always exist, and the measures present inside opposition in status quo are merely not enough to protect the youth from this. Outside government, we believe that our youth should be protected at the highest level. So instead of hoping everyone's going to be the model citizen and having no mitigation to the problems that will arise on their side, we block it off and we break it off no matter who the people are via our stricter regulations. So on our side, at the very least, we try to do everything in our power to protect our youth. Instead of whatever side opposition are saying, sitting around and hoping that status quo is going to be effective, when status quo itself has proven to you that it is not effective. And now moving on to the worst case scenario. On our side, the worst possible thing that can happen on our side is that companies do not adhere to these regulations. So, how is it still good? We tell you that, okay, they don't follow the regulations, but this is only in the short term, because you cannot deny that in the long term, penalties will only get higher and higher, and the companies will have no choice but to oblige. In fact, the biggest course of action that the government can make is to completely shut down these companies. So now this is how we show you that there is in fact a very large and undeniable incentive for the companies to actually adhere to these regulations. And lastly, proving to you how we have proven the comparative. Because of the decreased amount of content that users are exposed to on our side, we make a sizable difference, and therefore we win on scale. Insofar as opposition cannot prove their only burden today, which is to defend status quo, they have lost this case, and with that, I've never been further to propose.
So one of the panelists going to the toilet, so we have to wait.
Is that water cooler inside?
Water cooler.
Water cooler.
Wait, can we all go to the toilet?
Yeah, might as well.
Might as well, but Don't bring your phone. A runner, one runners, can you follow? One of the runners.
My entire contingent went home already. I'm the only one left here. I didn't mind lah, actually wanted to stay here, but because I went to stay here, so just yeah, we're dipping lah. Can't find the room. And now they're watching inside out. They're like empty floor, you know.
Don't worry, bro. We're doing inside out with this one, bro. At first, I wasn't even looking. Oh, let me go home early. Yeah, I was like, oh, wait. It should be possible for 3 times. Send me some. Give it to me. We can try for 5 minutes. Okay. Bring us in. Isn't he junior? And then watch what fucking man. Move on. He has head coaches. No, move on.
Fix my posture. Make sure everything is not compromised.
Oh, Paolo's the only one left.
He really has been holding it on since the morning.
Dude has 2 gallons, like all like the he can just remote the tank.
Right, you good? Good. Okay. I'd like to call opposition whip to deliver their speech. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Thank you. I'll be beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. If your parent tells you to jump off the building because you didn't get 100 marks on your exam, therefore you get depression, and now they blame it on social media because every time you talk about it, they hold it liable on social media. This is at the point where side government fails. Panel, no, this debate does not exist in a vacuum where it talks about suicide and depression exclusively coming from social media. We are talking about suicide and depression as a
as a problem in general, and social media being one of the contributors. The issue is, some government have completely gone on harping about how social media is going to cause people to have suicide and depression, and they win on this scale. But the problem is, they do not even prove to us exactly how these regulations even work, and how this will even cause any significant improvement in the first place. Before we go into two clashes. Number one, the idea of youth, and then number two, the idea of who should bear this responsibility. Let's look at the first clash, the idea of youth, right? They tell you that instead of having two avenues of like bullying and and grooming, you have only one avenue. I have two responses. Number one, I'll take later. Number one, the idea of how these regulations will work in the first place. I've been listening throughout the entire batch, and they tell you that they impose stricter regulations, but they don't tell you how this will even counter the problem of, for example, grooming. If a naked man shows you a picture and you ban him, he's just gonna make another Instagram account and show you another naked picture. It doesn't solve the issue, right? The second problem then is, even if it does work, for some reason Instagram, when they get sued for having like groomers in Instagram, they somehow can manage to lock them up and make sure they never post again. The problem of depression still exists from ideas such as like body image issues, right? For example, from ideas such as feeling that they're not good enough and perfectionist because of like exams and so on. And so on and so forth. Even at the best case, where somehow these regulations do work, we tell you that like comparatively, they then shift this burden exclusively onto social media, telling other people that your mental illness comes from social media. And look, because this person did not see naked people on the internet, therefore they feel like the depression is cured. Let's talk about the mental health awareness, right? We went exclusively on this idea, telling you on the idea of how many youth in society feel the stigma. They feel like when they have depression, they cannot tell anybody physically because they know these people. They feel like it's embarrassing and something they do not want to tell other people. And the only way that they seek any kind of solace and refuge is through social media, through other people who have similar experiences. They tell you when you see other people, it's like government tells you when you see other people self-harm, you're likely going to feel enabled. That's not true, right? The idea then is when you go on social media, you see people giving you support, giving you advice, you feel like there's somebody who empathizes with you, and you feel like this idea means that you're able to finally get some sort of help, and they can push you to do things like therapy. But in government world, where parents now believe that the problem is always social media, when you tell people like your parents, I feel like I have depression, they're just going to tell you to get off the damn phone. The idea then now, mental health awareness falls on their side. Second idea, on the idea of youth, right? They tell you then that our burden is to protect the youth. Okay, they tell you that they have the unique benefit of at least people don't get that bullied online, and therefore that doesn't cause your depression. We tell you this is not true. Even if the regulations work, we tell you that the fact is that a lot of people who claim that they have depression or suicide due to social media comes from underlying issues. The reason why you still feel so bad about yourself when you see body image issues online is because you're always being bullied and you're always feeling insecure about yourself, right? The reason why when someone online tells you that you suck and you're stupid is because you've never felt that kind of validation from your parents. The reason why when social media tells you about like all kinds of feelings makes you feel alone is because it's the only escape from like an abusive household. These are issues that they don't solve. Insofar as they're contingent on the fact that the policy doesn't work, then the fact that all of these don't work at all because you continuously shifted the burden of like depression onto social media. And if you do consistently, this is what people will think. I'll take one POI.
If we hold social media companies liable and children cannot have social media, how can parents say it's because of your damn phone when they don't even have an account?
The problem is this is about youth, right? You cannot ban social media up to like 20 years old. Most of the people who get depression, have suicide thoughts are people who are like teenagers. You cannot stop people who are 16 from going onto social media unless that's on your side. Then you only have like adults on social media, and therefore all your points on like kids like seeing goal and then like social media and all that doesn't exist, right? Then so in order to make your policy work, you have to make sure that the idea is that you have these teens or these kids who either don't have access to social media. Now that like this is under that world, we tell you on the idea of parents and who has the true responsibility. This POI shows me that it was like say a 11-year-old kid tell their parents they have these suicidal thoughts, and then now tell their parents they have suicidal thoughts. The problem here now is that under their side, because you continuously push the idea that okay, social media is so liable, you're seeing gore, you're seeing cyberbullying, but because they push it that these are the causes, right? Parents are easy to say, okay, yeah, you don't have social media, but the fact is that like they won't take you seriously because they think that social media, like you feel like you're suicidal only because you get cyberbullied. You feel like you're suicidal only because of these causes from social media. If you don't have it, then it doesn't exist. The problem is people are in status quo, at least people are finding avenues to be able to address their mental health issues at the very least. Who then holds this responsibility? If not, if these social media companies do have a responsibility for ensuring these kids right. Yeah, that's why you do have present regulations. Do we need to make these regulations so strict to the point that you restrict any kind of mental health awareness avenue? No, because the fact is that number one, it's not going to work, and number two, even if it works, we tell you that the trade-off that you stop people from having any kind of avenue or any kind of way to seek any outside help falls completely under their side. People will never have therapy, will have no other way to seek therapy when they don't have any exposure, because anytime you post the word suicide, the censoring or Instagram is going to ban your account. We tell you that the margin of benefit under our side is that when you do not hold social media accountable, if you do allow people to finally find some kind of sort of avenue to finally know that your depression or suicide comes from other kinds of factors and not fully put that blame onto social media. Are we saying that social media has like no blame whatsoever? No, but the problem is you exacerbate the issue because by finding and doing all of that, we tell you block off any kind of avenue. The comparative on their side then is that side government has a vacuum world where people on kids who are on YouTube kids are sometimes gonna feel happy because they don't feel like they have any they're not gonna get cyberbullied or get groomed, right? But the problem is all the other social health, mental health issues outside never get solved because of the self problem that people always feel that is social media selling. And with that, start this out.
Thank you, Opposition Whip. Opposition reply whenever you're ready.
Proposition has phrased their case make it seem like only kids are the victims of depression when they tell us about these age restrictions. And I think the moment in which they choose to go down that strategy, I think the moment their harm still exists on their side, their case falls. Two things in my speech. I'm going to do first thing, I'm going to be talking about the burdens on both sides who have managed to prove those sufficiently. Secondly, talking about the most important stakeholder, which is people with these mental health problems. And then lastly, presenting a comparative on both sides of the house. First thing, what is proposition? What's the biggest burden that proposition has told you today? I think the biggest thing they wanted to prove today was the idea of security and regulations occurring. I think Witt then points out to you that these regulations, like throughout all three speeches, we hear little bits and pieces of regulations, being age restriction and whatever. But I think firstly that doesn't solve the problem of all this content appearing on social media, so that harm still exists. But I think secondly then, even if they were to impose certain content regulations, how feasible is this realistically? Because a lot of people will go regulations aren't going to stop a certain pedophile from still grooming people. But I think thirdly then on the idea of age restriction, that almost implies that only people above a specific age aren't going to see these things, and then suddenly they're not going to be depressed, which I think counters a lot of the arguments coming from their side when a lot of the arguments are contingent on social media being the biggest or the only factor when it comes to suicide and depression. And I think last thing I want to mention here is I think depression exists still on their side of the house because it is just restrictions on restrictions on age. I think that if that's what truly causes depression, then mental health problems don't actually get solved on their side. Right, what do we tell you as opposition? We tell you that when we push the burden of these mental health problems being onto when you push it onto social media, you take away the importance of actually dealing with the problem at hand because people are more likely to overlook these issues when they find another party that they can blame apart from taking this seriously and actually looking at perhaps the underlying reason behind why this is possible, why this even happened in the first place. Secondly, in terms of the stakeholder clash, on people with these mental health problems. I think they tell you the idea of less cyberbullying and less bullying occurring under their side of the house. And fine, perhaps we can consider that cyberbullying rates will drop. There's still no reason to believe mental health problems are going to both sides can't completely eradicate it, right? But I think at the very least, opposition manages to prove to you that people are able to take it more seriously when you don't simply overlook it, or when you don't simply think that you can just blame it on social media and use that as an excuse to not care about the mental health problem at hand. I think then lastly, going on to the comparative, right? When they tell you it is proposition tells you it is social media's fault, we tell you then firstly, when they tell you that it's social media's fault, we tell you that the removal of social media doesn't take away, it doesn't necessarily solve depression at the end of the day. I think secondly then, when they tell you about all these stricter regulations and how better security is going to happen, we tell you that's simply not going to stop, that's simply not going to stop, that's not going to stop a bunch of these other big issues like cyberbullying, pedophile and grooming still happening. Because this world doesn't exist in a vacuum, it is so difficult to regulate these kind of things. What do we tell you on the opposition? We tell you that in status quo, we tell you this burden isn't pushed onto social media. We don't blame social media for being a big contributing factor. We don't hold these social media platforms and shift that burden onto social media platforms. We think that's so much better because then people are more likely to take this seriously. Secondly, we think parents are less likely to weaponize this and to actually take accountability perhaps for the issues that their kids are facing mentally. But then thirdly, we think that there are groups that exist and which are the only avenue for people with these mental health problems. With these mental health problems, we tell you that we are the only group that doesn't isolate them completely, and we prioritize those who already have these mental health problems.
Thank you, opposition reply. Government reply whenever you're ready.
Am I audible at this volume?
Yep.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. I know I've been talking about natural disasters, but the real natural disaster here is side opposition's case, which started off with soil erosion and turned into a full-on landslide by their second speaker. One major clarification: liable does not mean telling social media platforms, hey, you are the problem. It is forcing them to take accountability, and I'll engage with that in my reply. There are 5 things I want to talk about here. Outside influences, sharing mental health problems. Thirdly, taking away the focus on mental health problems. Fourthly, the narrative shift and what we contributed in this debate. Firstly, on outside influences, because I like to point out that they keep attacking us for our regulation mechanism, but it's already explained in PM very clearly. When you sue companies, if they don't want to be sued anymore, when you legally oblige companies or you take them to court, they are forced to do these things. I don't understand how we have to prove the feasibility of these things being carried out. If companies want to lose money, then they'll follow the regulations lah. I don't understand why we have to keep on arguing about it. But secondly, on sharing mental health. First of all, I like to point out that there's a clear new material in WIT, but on enabling that. Because I like to point out, there is no mechanism for just because you have depression, you go online and see 20 other people with depression is somehow supposed to make you feel better. But firstly, they've never proved, even if this was true, why it weighs over letting children be enabled and exploited. Social media is a cesspool. Children cannot consent and regulations cannot work. So their second speaker's point about how gore is not allowed, it doesn't matter anyway. Because sure, you can ban someone from saying KYS, but they'll just say KYS $sign. Because those regulations are things that do not work. The flip is regulations on age restrictions actually do work. Because instead of trying to take down 5,000 posts, all you have to do is stop one account that needs birth certificate, certification, and that is something that is so much easier on our side. But lastly, they tell us that we cannot stop all kinds of depression. There is a scale here here. This is not this house regrets social media. Yeah, sure, we concede. Majority of us maybe do have depression because we have STM, but we reduce it for children that cannot consent, right? Because if these children cannot consent, if we reduce the exposure of them to harmful influences, then we at least reduce it on some kind of scale. But thirdly, on the narrative shift, because I think this is extremely funny coming from both of the second and third speakers. They say that if we hold social media companies liable, then parents can just say, oh, it's the social media that's doing all of this. Firstly, this is extremely funny because if you notice our regulation is to stop children from using social media. So I'm left at a loss, right? If I don't have Instagram, then how can my parents say that it's Instagram that's causing my depression? I don't understand this at all. How can it be social media's fault? And how does this argument even work at all if people are not allowed to use because of stricter regulations? They never dealt with our mechanism here. But fourthly, social media is not a magnifying glass. So they cannot say you will realize your depression when you use social media because it's not a magnifying glass, it is kerosene oil. When you self-harm or you have other mental issues, you are enabling other people. Social media is not a therapy support group. There is a reason you go to therapy when you have depression and not meet 20 depressed people and talk about your depression in a circle. We never took the blame of anyone. Even if we do, we are fine with shifting the focus of social media, like the liability of children to social media, if it means that social media can get eradicated. Because we most likely cannot cut off our parents, but we can eradicate social media from the lives of children who simply never had the consent to opt into it. The last thing here, what impacts we brought in this debate? Firstly, when we hold social media accountable, children feasibly cannot go there. So I don't understand the mechanism of parents blaming social media. We're regulating using age restrictions, not content restrictions. They completely mistook what my PM said when he said it very clearly. If they have depression, they can recover more if they're not exposed to 20 other people saying they want to self-harm every single day. That is the delta here. The fact that being exposed to people with mental health issues does not help you. Do not let them fool you into thinking that Twitter is a mental therapy support group. No, it is a cesspool of individuals that do not do anything but harm for your mental health. If this was a chess match, it would be a scoreless match. If this were a debate, it would be a unanimous win. Thank you.
Thank you, opposition.